Lamborghini Temerario. Yep, it's another Lamborghini that can probably be pronounced 3 different ways, but the translation is pretty cool. Temerario in Italian means reckless. This is therefore the Lamborghini Reckless, and I like that vibe. It's also the car that means Lamborghini's entire range is now electrically assisted, which is not something you'd have imagined 10 years ago. But what's so reckless about it? Well, it's Lamborghini's first ever 188 brake horsepower front-wheel drive supercar. Wait, what? I'll explain that in a minute. In a proper Jekyll and Hyde moment, it's also Lamborghini's first car with a twin-turbo V8 with a flat-plane crank mounted in the middle that revs to a screaming 10,000 RPM. That's supplemented by 3 electric motors to give 4-wheel drive and 907 brake horsepower. Yep, I think we could all get pretty reckless with that. Thing is, this isn't just some gussied up Huracan with some extra pointy bits and angry eyes. This isn't yet another Lambo special. It's a whole new car, so I think we'd better run through the interesting stuff. First of all, the way it looks. This is the successor to the Huracan, so it's a bit smaller than the Revuelto, based on an all-new aluminium chassis that's 20% stiffer. And it's pretty compact for this sort of thing. We've got the typical Lamborghini mid-engine supercar proportions, short overhangs, a sharp nose, and a really slinky profile. And threaded through everything, hexagons. Hexagons everywhere, from the daylight running lights to the side intakes to the tail lights and exhaust pipes. And bits of the interior. It's like a supercar beehive. But there's more to it than immediately meets the eye. These daylight running lights in the front incorporate a radar sensor for the ADAS and an air channel that helps improve aero and cool the front brakes, and the rear lights have tunnels in them to do the same, pulling hot air from the engine bay. Even the aero wing mirrors punt cold air towards the radiators, and these big intakes obviously feed the engine, with some tricksy side skirts. And then there's a roof that actually directs air over the car and onto this ducktail spoiler. There's also a lightweight Allegorita package that gives more carbon, including wheels and a taller fixed wing if you want them, and a 25kg weight saving. And although that doesn't sound like much, the Allegorita set also gives you more wings and downforce if you're a trackophile. Less about weight saving, more about committing to the process. Weird fact. It can actually have 4 different sets of tyres on the 20-inch front and 21-inch rear wheels, all from Bridgestone. So you can go for the standard day-to-day Potenza Sport, or you can have run-flat version of that, handy when you don't have a spare. If you do track days, there's a race tyre and even a Blizzak winter tyre, which makes sense. It is 4-wheel drive, so it's basically a Land Rover. But the best bit is kept semi-under wraps. On display under a hexagon punch cover back here is the big news. An all-new twin-turbo V8 that revs to 10,000 RPM. 10,000. More bike than a turbo car. Yes, there are a few higher revving supercars out there, but they tend to be very edgy and very expensive. This is going to be Lamborghini's bread and butter supercar, so this is good news. So what about some specifics on that drivetrain? Well, it's a flat-plane crank 4-litre V8 with 2 turbos. On its own, it's about 197 brake horsepower per litre, so a noisy 788 brake horsepower. Now that's supplemented by 3 electric motors, 2 at the front to give all-wheel drive, and 1 wedged in the transmission to support the rear wheels. They're axial flow motors, so very compact and powerful, and they all basically support the V8 while the turbos spool, killing turbo lag. Total system output is 907 brake horsepower, which is definitely enough to get reckless with. If you want some pretty astonishing stats, the Temerario isn't actually much of a kid brother to the Revuelto. With its new 8-speed paddle shift gearbox, it'll do more than 210 miles an hour top end, 0 to 62 in 2.7 and 0 to 125 miles an hour in around 7.3 seconds. That is a neck breaker. But what Lamborghini are really aiming for here is the linearity, smoothness and pickup of a naturally aspirated engine, but with the power of turbochargers and the instant hit of electric. It should be the best of all worlds, but we'll have to drive it to figure out if it all hangs together. And also, hear it at 10,000 RPM, which should be pretty special. The Temerario basically gets noisier and more aggressive depending on mode and how you drive it, with exhaust valves and a tuned length exhaust system. Plus, the engine mounts have actually been tweaked to let more vibrations into the car when you're really on it, so you get the literal fizz if you're in full attack mode. So, on the inside. If you want to know why this is Lambo's first front-wheel drive 188 brake horsepower supercar, that's because in the central spine is a 3.8 kWh battery to give you some electric range. Exactly how much, no one has specified. When it does, it just uses the front motors and has 188 brake, so it's basically a hot hatch. Hence Lambo's first front-wheel drive supercar, and in case you were wondering, you can also charge the battery by plugging it into a domestic socket, charge it up via the V8 or regen braking. So it's basically a Toyota Prius plug-in, right? And that's not all. It's also more practical than before, with proper space for two. It's bigger inside than the Huracan, and it has decent storage in the 112 litre front boot and behind the seats. There's also a lot to take in with the Temerario in terms of new tech. It's certainly up the game for Lamborghini. Apart from the screens, including a passenger screen, there are cameras for the forward view, one that frames the dials and wheel, and a third that focuses on you. It's called the LAVU, or Lamborghini Vision Unit, so you've not just got a dash cam, but a little set of cameras for recording a lap or a memorable drive. There are also loads of connectivity and usability options, and a lot of modes, 13 in total. There's this thumbwheel here that chooses between recharge, hybrid or performance. So one's to charge that battery for later use, hybrid for a mix of everything, and performance which just deploys everything at all times, which will probably be my favourite. Then there's the mode wheel, which consists of Città, which means town or city mode, Strada, which means road, Sport, which means sport, Corsa, which means race, and Corsa Plus, which in Italian translates as careful now, since all the electronic controls are deactivated. Oh, and you see that little checkered flag button here? That's launch control. And all of those modes interact. So in some modes it's a front wheel drive and just battery, in others it's a mix of rear wheel drive with all wheel drive on demand. In the faster modes it's permanent all wheel drive and full power all the time. And there's electric torque vectoring to keep the car stable and nimble, as well as 3-stage drift mode depending on how brave you feel, and a telemetry mode to record all your mistakes and lap times for full transparency on exactly where you messed up. With the current crop of electric boosted cars in this area like the Ferrari 296 and the McLaren Artura, could this be the one to tempt you? Thing is, we've barely scratched the surface here. There's loads of really geeky good stuff about the new Temerario, and it promises to be one of the most exciting cars to come out of Lamborghini, well, since the Revuelto about 20 minutes ago. With prices likely to be a bit more than the previous Huracan, but less than the Revuelto, which one would you have? Temerario or Revuelto? Or actually just something else? I actually think the Temerario might be even more interesting than the more expensive car. Let me know what you think in the comments.